We have a country that is as divided as I can remember it in my lifetime, as polarized as we've ever been, and yet we have the greatest challenges before us. Millions who can't see a doctor or afford their medication, teachers forced to work 2 or 3 jobs because we're not paying them enough in the most important job that they have, a confrontation with a changing climate that lacks the political will to make sure that the floods that we're seeing along the Missouri and the Mississippi are not destroying communities and putting farms already underwater in debt, underwater right now. We need to call forth the genius of the American people. And the best way to do that is to bring us all together, regardless of the differences or the divisions. The people of this country are going to have a very clear choice. Someone who is in power today, who seeks to make us afraid and keep us apart and make us angry at one another, or someone who calls us to a common ambition and aspiration for us to be the best country that we can possibly be. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, but as Americans first. That's the way that I've served in the U.S. House of Representatives and have been able to work with Republicans to deliver greater care for our veterans. It's the way that I campaigned across Texas, winning more votes than any Democrat in the history of our great state. It's the way that I'm campaigning today here in Mason City, never asking anyone what party they belong to, just finding out how we can come together and make sure this country delivers to its true potential and fulfills its promise.
What is Beto O'Rourke doing to increase the civility of American politics?
I remember in March of 2017, I was touring a VA hospital with a Republican colleague in Congress. Our flights to DC were snowed in. We had to find another way to get to work, so we both hopped in a rental car and drove 1,600 miles and live streamed the entire journey. Our conversation at a human level about our lives, but also about policies that Americans care about, and showed that there's a way to agree on the common ground and a way to disagree without being disagreeable. In Congress, I was able to deliver for my constituents by finding that common ground with Republicans. It's the way that we campaigned across Texas. And here at Fat Hill Brewing in Mason City, as I was beginning my speech today, there was a gentleman at the end of the bar who was heckling me a little bit, disagrees with some of the conclusions that I've come to, but perhaps owing to the civility that we find here in Iowa, he came up and found me at the end of the event, apologized, and just shared with me what was on his mind. And I listened. I just listened for 10 minutes and have a better understanding of what is important to him. This guy, whether or not he votes for me, has to be part of the solutions that this country needs right now. We've got to come together or we simply will not make it. And it's also the only way to meet the greatest challenges of healthcare or of our economy or of immigration or of confronting climate change before it's too late. We cannot do it by half steps or half measures or with only half the country. We've got to bring everyone together, and that means treating people with dignity and respect without fail wherever we go. You know, as a small business owner who started a high-tech company in El Paso, Texas, employed dozens of my fellow El Pasoans in high-wage, high-skilled jobs, I know what it's like to meet a payroll every week. I know what it's like to create jobs in a community that needs it. I believe in the power of capitalism to unleash potential, to create opportunity for our fellow Americans, to help us meet some of the challenges that we have in front of us. In the Senate campaign that we just ran in Texas, we won independence for the first time in 10 years. We won the votes of 500,000 of my fellow Texans, Republicans who voted for a very conservative Republican governor, but voted for me on the same ballot without my having to in any way trim my sails or show up with anything less than the courage of my convictions. There is enough common ground on the issues that we care most about to bring this country together without running to the extremes, either to the left or to the right, to find out what we want to be able to do and then to pursue it, not as Democrats, but as Americans. I'll tell you that in Texas, we went to every one of the 254 counties of our state. It didn't matter how blue, we would not take you for granted. We showed up to listen to you, find out what was on your mind, respond, and reflect that in the campaign that we were running. It didn't matter how red or rural or small your community was. I showed up there as well. I didn't write you off, and I included you in the conversation and in our campaign. We need to run that way because when we did that in Texas, Young voter turnout was up 500%. We saw record level turnouts in a midterm that approached presidential election year turnout levels. And the way that we're campaigning here in Iowa, being in Pacific Junction and in Council Bluffs and in the southwest part of the state, and then coming here today to Mason City, going to every community, no matter how small, how big, how reliably red, or consistently blue. Those are our fellow Americans, and we're going to show up for them. And when we show up and we have this eyeball to eyeball connection like we just did at this town hall meeting, then we begin to earn not just the commitment to caucus, but the excitement and the passion that follows, that produces the volunteers necessary not just to win and be the next nominee, not just to defeat Donald Trump, but to bring this very divided country together in January of 2021 to get after it and do the work before us. Robert Kennedy is one of my all-time heroes. Somebody who had the courage of his convictions. Running for president in 1968, he defied the consultants and the advisors and the polls and talked about the issues that mattered and went to the places that had been left behind and were forgotten and made sure that they knew that they counted just as much as any American. So yes, he's one of the most inspirational figures in our country's history. And of course, any comparison is flattering. I don't know, to be honest with you, that I deserve that. I certainly don't feel like I have earned that. And what I'm setting out to do is to make sure that at this moment, with the greatest challenges that we have ever faced, a true reckoning and a defining moment of truth, that all of us come together and produce what history requires of us, what this moment demands, what our kids and grandkids will be counting on us for. And that involves all of us coming together, going everywhere. And maybe there's some inspiration from the 1968 campaign of going to the smallest of towns, the most rural of places, listening to those who had not been heard before and putting them front and center in that campaign. We're trying to do much the same thing here in Iowa and across this country right now, because this country at this moment needs every single one of us. Many of the questions have been about healthcare or public education or about the importance of unions or confronting climate change before it's too late. But don't misunderstand us. We also care about what has happened to our democracy and this constitutional crisis that we are approaching right now. I firmly believe that whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you care about the future of this country, our democracy, and the principle that no man, regardless of the power or position that he holds, is above the law. There must be accountability. There must be consequence for what happened to our democracy in 2016, the effort to cover the investigation up afterwards. And at the end of the day, if there is not justice, our form of government, this democracy, will not be able to persist. And so, not for the benefit of the Democratic Party, but for the benefit of the Republic, let's make sure that we get those answers and follow the facts as far as they go and as high up as they reach. And that's what all of us, regardless of party affiliation, should be focused on at this moment.